this is unbearable. We can't afford it. Obviously, something's going to break before we get to that point.
In today's video, Peter Schiff, founder, CEO and global strategist of Euro-Pacific Capital, gives a warning that the 2008 crisis was just the prelude to a larger sovereign debt crisis in the United States that may lead to a collapse of the US dollar.
You make a very good point because the Fed's one tool of raising rates seems completely insufficient at bringing inflation down to their target. How does this play out in your view? Does the patient die of the disease or the cure?
Well, it's going to die of one. But, it may actually end up dying of both. That is the problem. A lot of people think that the Fed has been successful in reducing inflation because, it went from 9 down to 3. And so maybe an extra quarter point or maybe a half point will complete the journey, right? Because we're almost there. But we're actually miles away because the main reason that you saw that big drop from 9 to 3 was a collapse of oil prices and other commodity prices that was basically brought about by a surge in the dollar, where currency traders were starting to price in all the rate hikes. So the Fed actually already got all the bang for the rate hike buck from that move. Now, oil prices are headed back up. We're back above $81 a barrel today, headed higher. Other commodity prices as well. The dollar has peaked, I think, and is declining. So the headline CPI probably has bottomed out in the low 3s, and now it's headed back up. Meanwhile, if you look at the core, which is what the Fed claims is more important anyway, that's still around 5. And the decline in the core is far less than the decline in headline. I mean, it's barely gone down, despite the fact that we've moved interest rates from 0 to 5.5. So if the terminal rate is 5.25, 5.75, 6, that's not much from where we are now. And so why would that actually do anything when we haven't seen a meaningful decline? And also, people forget that these rate hikes are in and of themselves price hikes, because it's the price of credit, the price of borrowing. And so every business that has debt is now having to pay more to service that debt, whether it's your landlord who's got a mortgage, a commercial mortgage that's resetting, or it's a business that has borrowed money to purchase plant or equipment and has interest rates to pay. That's just like labor costs or raw material costs. It's another cost of doing business that is rising. And so businesses then try to pass on those higher costs to their end consumer with higher prices. So as higher interest rates continue to work their way through the cost structure, you've got more upward pressure. So I don't see how the Fed has really accomplished much of anything. And also, if you think about the way rate hikes are supposed to reduce inflation, and Powell will admit this when he talks, they're supposed to reduce aggregate demand by making it more expensive to borrow, so that people will borrow less and they'll spend less, and that'll slow the economy, the way they describe it. But none of that is happening. Credit card debt is at an all-time record high. The government budget deficits are skyrocketing. We're on a run rate now of north of $2 trillion a year in deficit spending, and we're not even technically in a recession yet. I mean, normally when you're in a recession, the deficits double or triple. And so, but they're already enormous. And so even though the Fed has been making credit more expensive, it hasn't slowed down demand for borrowing. Consumers just are paying the higher prices, borrowing the money anyway, and spending it. So all that spending is still driving prices higher. So I don't think the Fed has made any headway at all.
What are the main points of his speech that you think investors should be paying attention to?
Well, I mean, first of all, he had to pay lip service to the idea that the Fed is going to get inflation back down to 2% and do whatever it takes, right? Come hell or high water, we're going to do this. Powell did admit that we're a long way from there, which is my point. I mean, if we're a long way from 2% and the Fed is already at 5.5%, how are we going to finish this journey if the destination is so far into the distance? But I thought that the most disingenuous aspect of his talk is that he's talking to the nation about the inflation problem and how great a threat it is, and how it's so important to the Fed, to extinguish this threat. But no mention of the massive fiscal stimulus that is being pursued by the White House and Congress, because you're trying to put out a fire and Congress is pouring gasoline on the very fire you're trying to put out. You're not making any headway. What Powell should be doing is what Paul Volcker did when Volcker was in his position, and he was trying to fight inflation at a time where the governments were running large deficits. Of course, they weren't large, by today's standards, but they were large by the standards of the day. And Paul Volcker was, harshly critical of the deficits and was scolding Congress, saying, you got to cut spending, because if you want less inflation, we need less government spending. We need to, reduce the deficit, balance the budget. But Powell completely lets Biden off the hook in Congress. He acts as if these deficits don't even exist. He's saying we're trying to reduce aggregate demand with higher interest rates. Well, the government is stimulating aggregate demand with massive budget deficits. So which is it? I mean, how are we going to have stimulative fiscal policy and contractionary monetary policy? They're working at cross purposes. How are we going to make any headway? We're not. And ultimately, what's going to happen, if the deficit spending continues, which it will, the Fed is going to have to choose between a massive increase in long-term interest rates, far beyond what we've already seen. I mean, we're at, 18-year highs or something like that, 16-year highs. The yields on the 10-year, out to 30 years are, 4.2-ish. But if these deficits continue and the Fed continues with quantitative tightening, these yields are going to move up to 6%, 8%. I mean, they're going to go substantially higher. And of course, that's going to have a profound effect on the financial sector, on real estate. I mean, the whole economy is ultimately going to collapse when we get a return to those type of rates. In fact, everybody believes that we're going to go back to the really low rates that we had for more than a decade. That's never going to happen. But not only are we not going back down to those super low rates, we're actually going to historically high rates. I mean, right now, they're not even average. They're still below average. But I think what the Fed is going to end up doing to prevent that from happening is reversing this quantitative tightening program that has so far shrunk the balance sheet, close to $8 trillion. It was almost $9 trillion at the peak. So we're getting close to $1 trillion decline in the balance sheet. But with these deficits, the way they're going, the Fed's going to reverse and go back to QE, and the balance sheet is going to explode. In fact, if you look at interest now, interest payments on the national debt, they've gone from a few $100 billion a year to $700-800 billion. I think right now, interest on the national debt is the third biggest expense. First Medicare, then Social Security, then interest on the debt. Interest on the debt is bigger than national defense. If you can believe that, as big as defense is, interest on the debt is bigger. But interest is growing really exponentially, because not only do we have to pay the extra interest on the $2 trillion a year that we're borrowing, more than $2 trillion, but every year, let's say $10 trillion worth of debt matures and needs to be rolled over. Well, it's maturing with a coupon of maybe 5 basis points, 20 basis points, maybe up to 100, 150 basis points, depending on the maturity. But most of it is real short term. Most of the paper that's maturing, the Fed borrowed the money a year ago, 2 years ago. Well, where were the rates back then? They were practically zero. Now they're 5. And so as all this debt matures and has to be refinanced at, 5 plus, if they want to do it with, 6 month, 30 day, 1 year, right? If they want to go all the way out 10 years, well then, but it's still in the 4s. compared to where it is now. So the costs are skyrocketing. I think that by the end of the year, we'll be at about $1 trillion a year in net interest payments. And probably by the end of next year, we'll be at 2. And I think interest on the national debt will then be the single largest expenditure of the nation, bigger than Medicare and Social Security. And in a few more years, it'll be bigger than all those combined, right? Because what happens if the national debt gets to 40 trillion and interest rates go to 10%? That's $4 trillion a year in interest. I mean, we're going to be at 40 trillion national debt in a few years. We're at 30, almost 33 trillion now. We're adding more than 2 trillion a year. So in 3 or 4 years, we're at 40 trillion. And by then, all that low yielding debt will be gone and it will be replaced by much higher yielding debt. So maybe it won't be 10%, but let's say it's 7 or 8%. You're still looking at $3 trillion a year in interest payments. I mean, this is unbearable. We can't afford it. Obviously, something's going to break before we get to that point.
So in this situation here, is the Fed ignorant? Are they helpless? Or are they just plain evil? In other words, do you ascribe to the theory out there that they could be intentionally engineering a destruction of the economy?
No, I mean, I don't think they're inherently evil, nor do I think they're smart enough to do this on purpose. I think it's a combination of ignorance. You know, you think these guys are so smart, right? Oh, they must be the smartest people because they got these jobs. No, they didn't get the jobs because they were smart. If they really understood economics, they wouldn't have even been considered for these jobs. These are bureaucrats, right? They're not the smartest people in the world when it comes to understanding finance or economics. If they were that smart, they'd be, running hedge funds or something. I mean, they wouldn't be sitting at the Fed. So these guys don't know what's going on. The fact that we ascribe some kind of like all-knowing power, that they actually know what's going on in the economy and that they actually can micromanage it by tinkering with interest rates, and they're going to somehow, improve everybody's lives, by trying to manipulate the price of money and the money supply. That's sheer nonsense. So they're not as smart as everybody thinks they are, number one. And they went to all the normal universities and had the type of career path, so they learned all this Keynesian BS. And that's how they had the qualifications to get appointed to these jobs. So they don't really understand that much. But they're also concerned about postponing any pain. They're very political at the Fed, despite the fact that they claim to be independent. The Fed chairman tends to do whatever he thinks is necessary to make the economy look better for the incumbent administration. And part of that is self-serving, because most of these Fed chairmen and people on the FOMC, they like their jobs. They're probably the best jobs they can get because they're not actually that smart. So they like these cushy jobs. And the president is the one that appoints them, whoever it is. And so they want to demonstrate that they're team players, that they're going to, if whichever party is in power, we're going to do what we can to make you look good, to help you get reelected so we can get reappointed. And so I think they're looking at this massive problem and thinking, holy shit, we can't allow the markets to try to correct these mistakes because there's so many of them. We're so screwed up. It's like we're going to have one hell of a hangover if we stop taking these drugs now. So we're going to keep taking these drugs so we can get through the next election, and then we'll deal with it after the election. And of course, when one election ends, there's always another election right around the corner, and so we never kick the habit. We keep taking more and more drugs, and so I think it's just it's a self-perpetuating cycle of can kicking until eventually there's a complete crisis. And then when the crisis happens, they just say, oh, well, nobody could have predicted this. This is just completely out of left field. This is just a 100-year flood. There's this, and that's what they did with the financial crisis, right? But this one's going to be much worse. And what they will do is they'll somehow find a way to blame it on capitalism. Capitalism always takes the fall. For when government screws up, they blame it on capitalism. They say, we just need more regulation. That's all, right? We just need more government involvement. We'll make sure it doesn't happen again. But of course, the more government involvement we have, all that ensures is that when it does happen again, it's even worse.